At first, I didn't suspect a thing. When Daniel came home late from work and said he might crash at a coworker's place after a long project, I believed him. That's what trust looks like, right? Every marriage has its phases, I told myself, and maybe this was just one of those stretches. But something in my gut kept whispering that things didn't quite add up. I brushed it aside, until I noticed it was always happening on the weekends. Friday nights became his too tired to drive back after hanging out with the guys routine. I'd smile, pretending to understand, while inside I felt this quiet ache of being left behind. Saturday nights carried the same story, and Sundays turned into mornings of waiting for him to stroll back in. I tried to convince myself it was temporary, just work stress or a passing phase. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. The third weekend in a row, I finally spoke up. Another night away? That's the third weekend in a row, Daniel. He shrugged, his voice flat. It's just easier this way. Don't worry so much, it's nothing. I forced a smile, though my stomach tightened. Nothing? Or something you don't want me to see? His eyes flashed and he snapped, "Stop being paranoid, Laura." I laughed it off, but inside, suspicion had already begun to burn. I told myself not to overthink it, but every little detail started standing out. The way he'd shower right before heading to work. The way he carefully packed an overnight bag, though he called it just a quick stop. I noticed he'd check his phone more often, his thumb flying across the screen before he quickly locked it whenever I walked in. I wanted to believe his words, but his actions painted another story, and my heart knew it. At night, lying alone in our bed, the silence was deafening. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if this was what marriage was supposed to feel like, waiting for scraps of time together, questioning if you were enough. The smell of his cologne would linger on the pillow, sharp and bittersweet, and I'd clutch it like proof that he'd been here. But proof of what exactly? His presence, or the start of his absence? I didn't share my fears with anyone at first. I thought maybe I was just tired, maybe projecting insecurities that weren't real. But every weekend chipped away at my certainty, and the excuses piled higher than the trust I once leaned on. I kept smiling when he'd kiss my cheek on his way out, but inside I was breaking, piece by piece, waiting for the moment I'd either be proven wrong or devastatingly right. The next Saturday, I caught myself staring at the clock, each minute dragging like an hour. When the door stayed shut long past midnight, I paced the living room, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. My phone sat heavy in my hand, daring me to call him. But I already knew he wouldn't pick up. He never did after 10. That silence felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. When he finally walked in the next morning, he acted like nothing was wrong. Humming as he tossed his keys on the counter, smiling like a man who had no secrets. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But instead, I forced my lips into a thin smile. He kissed the top of my head, unaware that my heart was thundering with suspicion. For the first time, I looked at him and wondered who he really was when he wasn't here. That was the moment the shift happened. The doubt that had been simmering suddenly began to boil, too loud to ignore. I promised myself I wouldn't let this pattern keep eating away at me. If Daniel was hiding something, I needed to know. And soon, I'd find myself sharing that secret weight with the only person I trusted to see through me completely. My best friend, Mia. I couldn't carry the weight of my suspicions alone anymore, so I called Mia. She's been my best friend since college, the kind of woman who can read me with just a glance. The moment she heard my voice, she knew something was wrong. We met at her kitchen table, coffee mugs steaming between us, and I finally let the words tumble out. He doesn't come home on weekends anymore. Always some excuse. My voice cracked on the last word, and she reached across, squeezing my hand. Mia didn't sugarcoat things. She never has. Laura, men don't suddenly stop coming home for work. He's lying to you. Her bluntness stung, but it also felt like a mirror reflecting the truth I was too scared to face. I tried to push back, my chest tightening as I whispered, "But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just being paranoid?" She shook her head slowly, her eyes steady on mine. "Then get the proof," she said firmly. "Stop giving him the benefit of the doubt he doesn't deserve." Her words cut through my excuses like glass. I sat there, staring at the swirl of coffee in my cup, knowing she was right. I couldn't keep hiding behind hope. If Daniel was betraying me, I needed to know for sure. And the thought of finding out the truth both terrified me and gave me a strange sense of power. After that talk with Mia, I started paying closer attention. It was like putting on a new pair of glasses. Suddenly, I saw everything more clearly. Daniel always left freshly showered, his skin still damp, his hair combed like he was heading out on a date. He didn't grab just any clothes. He chose his best ones, the shirts he used to save for anniversaries or family gatherings. And when I called after 10, it went straight to voicemail, no matter what excuse he gave later. I began jotting things down in a little notebook Mia gave me, every detail neatly lined up. The time he left, what he wore, even the cologne he used. At first, I felt ridiculous, like some undercover detective in my own marriage. But the more I wrote, the more undeniable the pattern became. Weekend after weekend, the pieces fell into place, each one sharpening the outline of a truth I didn't want to see. It was exhausting, living in that in-between space of suspicion and silence. At night, I'd lie awake, running my fingers over the edges of that notebook like it was some kind of lifeline. Part of me still hoped I'd find proof that confirmed he was telling the truth, that I'd been overthinking. But another part, the louder part, was bracing for the moment I'd discover he'd built a whole other life outside these walls. The breaking point came one Sunday morning when Daniel strolled in, humming as though he hadn't just disappeared for 2 nights. He kissed my cheek lightly, and I swear I could smell a faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine. My stomach flipped, but I kept my face steady. Inside, though, it felt like the ground was shifting under me. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't just wait for him to confess. I had to uncover the truth myself. Later that day, I called Mia again. "You were right," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Something's not adding up, and I can't ignore it anymore." She didn't sound surprised. "Then stop waiting for him to hand you the answers. Follow him if you have to, Laura. Protect yourself." Her words lit a fire in me, one that pushed back against the helplessness I'd been drowning in. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a plan. That night, lying awake, I made a silent vow. The next time Daniel gave me one of his flimsy excuses, I'd be ready. I would stop being the woman left in the dark. I would follow the trail he thought I couldn't see, and I'd find out exactly where these so-called weekends away were leading him. When Daniel mentioned a work retreat that upcoming weekend, I kept my face neutral, nodding as if I believed him. Inside, though, my heart was racing. This was it, the chance I'd been waiting for. I told him to drive safe, kissed him goodbye, and then quietly set my plan into motion. My hands trembled as I opened the shared account on my phone, the one he'd forgotten we both had access to. Within seconds, a blinking dot on the map told me exactly where he was headed. I followed at a careful distance, every turn of the wheel tightening the knot in my stomach. My breath caught when the little blue dot stopped, not at an office or some co-worker's house, but at a hotel on the far side of town. I parked a few spaces back, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel, and waited. Minutes felt like hours. Then, I saw him step out of his car, not alone, but with a woman by his side. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm like it belonged there. My chest tightened, but I stayed frozen, watching through the windshield as they walked into the lobby together. The lies I'd been swallowing for weeks suddenly became flesh and bone, right there in front of me. I wanted to scream, to confront them both in that moment. But instead, I picked up my phone, dialed his number, and pressed it to my ear, ready to hear just how far he'd go with the charade. When he picked up, his voice was smooth, almost bored. "Hey, just another long day of meetings." "Wish you were here," he said, as if the lie rolled off his tongue without effort. I sat there in the parking lot, watching him through the glass doors as he leaned close to her, his hand resting on the small of her back. Meetings," I murmured into the phone, forcing my tone to stay casual, though my heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He chuckled, oblivious. "Yeah, it's exhausting. Can't wait to get back home tomorrow." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, gripping the steering wheel to stop my hands from shaking. "Got it," I whispered, then let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable before I ended the call. He didn't even notice. He was too busy holding the door open for her, too busy slipping into that hotel lobby with her by his side. The betrayal was like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My marriage, the man I thought I knew, reduced to a cheap secret behind sliding glass doors. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. I straightened in my seat, memorizing every detail, every gesture, every lie he didn't know I'd caught in real time. If Daniel thought he was playing me for a fool, he had no idea who he was up against. I sat there for what felt like forever, the hotel's neon sign flickering above me, casting everything in a sickly glow. Couples came and went, some laughing, some holding hands, all of them shadows of what I used to think Daniel and I were. My chest ached, but beneath the pain was something sharper. Clarity. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid. He was lying, and I had just watched him walk into a hotel with proof on his arm. I pulled out my phone again, my fingers trembling as I snapped a photo of his car parked right there in the lot. Then another, zooming in on him through the glass doors, his hand still brushing against her back. Each click of the camera felt like reclaiming a piece of the power he'd stolen from me. Evidence. That's what Mia had told me I needed. And now I had it. Tangible, undeniable, devastating. Driving home that night, the silence inside the car was heavy. But I wasn't broken anymore. I was calculating. Every mile I put between myself and that hotel was a mile closer to the moment I'd finally confront him. I knew Daniel would stroll back in on Sunday, pretending nothing had happened. And when he did, I'd be ready. Not with tears, but with the truth in my hands and fire in my voice. Sunday night, the sound of his keys in the door hit me like a trigger. I was sitting in the living room, the lamp casting a warm glow over the stack of evidence hidden beneath a magazine on the coffee table. Daniel strolled in humming, his jacket slung casually over his shoulder, the picture of a man with nothing to hide. "Hey, honey," he said, dropping his keys with a smile. "I'm beat. Those meetings could put anyone to sleep." I tilted my head, watching him with a calmness that felt unnatural, almost rehearsed. "Meetings, huh?" I asked, my voice steady, though my blood was rushing like a storm under my skin. He chuckled, already moving toward the kitchen. Exhausting. I could sleep for days. He didn't even look at me, didn't notice the way my eyes followed every step, every lie dripping from his lips. I leaned back on the couch, my heart thudding, and said softly, "Funny, because your meetings looked pretty lively from where I was sitting." His feet stopped mid-step, his body stiffening before he turned around. That easy smile faltered just a little, but he tried to mask it. "What's that supposed to mean, Laura?" he asked, his tone suddenly sharp, defensive. And in that moment, I knew I had him cornered. I stood up slowly, my legs steady, even though my insides were trembling. I reached under the magazine and pulled out the folded hotel receipt, the paper crinkling loudly in the silence. Room 214 at the Lakeside Hotel, I said, holding it out like a weapon. His eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for air. Laura, I can explain, he stammered, the first crack in his confident mask. Explain what? My voice rose, no longer calm but sharp, cutting through the room. That you've been lying to me for months? That while I sat here waiting, you were with her? He shook his head violently, stepping toward me, but I held my ground. It's not what you think, he blurted, desperation creeping into his tone. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I snapped, my throat tight but my words clear. Every excuse, every weekend away. It was all for her. You made me believe I was paranoid, that I was losing my mind, when the whole time you were just covering your tracks. His face drained of color, his hands hanging useless at his sides, as if he finally realized the walls were closing in. I could see the panic flicker across his face, but I felt strangely calm now, like the storm inside me had finally broken. He reached for me, his voice cracking. Laura, please, let me explain. It was a mistake. I yanked my arm back before he could touch me. A mistake? I barked. No, Daniel. Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. Leaving your wife alone every weekend so you can play house with another woman? That's a choice. His lips parted, but no words came out. For once, he was speechless, the lies dried up on his tongue. I could almost see him scrambling in his head, trying to stitch together another excuse, another cover story. But nothing would stick. I stood there, holding his lies in my hand, feeling more powerful than I had in months. He wasn't the man with the upper hand anymore. That power had shifted. I turned my back on him, my voice cold as steel. You've taken enough from me, Daniel. My trust, my weekends, my peace of mind. But you're not taking anything else. As I walked down the hallway, I already knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Because while he thought he'd fooled me, he had no idea what it looks like when I decide to fight back. The very next morning, I opened the notebook where I'd tracked every late night, every excuse, every so-called work retreat. One by one, I laid out the receipts, the screenshots, the photos I'd taken of his car at the hotel. Each piece of evidence felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place. Mia sat across from me, her expression fierce. This is airtight, she said, flipping through the stack. He won't be able to wriggle out of this, not with everything you've got. I felt a strange calm settle over me, not sadness, not rage, just clarity. He thought he could gaslight me into silence, I whispered, tracing a finger along the hotel receipt. But now he's going to learn what silence really feels like, when everyone around him knows who he really is. Mia leaned forward, her voice low and steady. So, what's the plan? I met her eyes and allowed myself the smallest, sharpest smile. First, his family, then his job. He built this double life on lies, Mia. I'm going to take every single one of them and use it to burn down the illusion he's been living in. By the time I'm done, he won't just lose me. He'll lose the respect he thought he could always count on. I started with his sister, the one who'd always treated our marriage like a joke when he bragged about guy stuff. I sent her a single, calm message, just a photo of the receipt, the hotel name, the date. Her reply came back in minutes, small shock emojis and one blunt question. Is this true? When she called, her voice trembled, then hardened. She wanted proof, and I gave it to her, line by line. The family dinners that used to feel awkward suddenly had a new tension, like a secret settling into the room and refusing to be ignored. Next came his work. I met with a lawyer who smelled faintly of old books and coffee, the kind of person who made me feel like a strategist instead of a victim. We went through everything, the location data, the photos, the receipts, and he nodded at each piece as if checking boxes on a map that led straight to accountability. We'll file, he said, practical and precise. Not just divorce papers, evidence packets for HR, public exposure where appropriate. I let the word file sit in my mouth. It tasted like finality, and strangely, release. As the dominoes began to fall, I watched Daniel's confident world wobble. Calls went unanswered. Colleagues who'd once laughed at his stories kept their distance. His sister stopped inviting him to family events. At home, the house was suddenly too quiet for him. No hum of secret life to return to, just the echo of choices he'd made. I felt grief for what we'd lost, yes, but also a fierce lightness, like an old coat I'd finally taken off. There was more to do, but the momentum was mine now. When I finally sat across from Daniel in the lawyer's office, he looked nothing like the man who used to walk out on weekends with a smug smile. His shoulders slumped, his eyes bloodshot, his voice barely a whisper. "Laura, please. We can fix this," he begged, like a child grasping at something already broken. I slid the folder across the table. Every receipt, every screenshot, every lie documented in black and white. "No, Daniel. You already made your choice. Now I'm making mine." The lawyer's tone was professional, but I caught the faintest edge of admiration in his words. "With this evidence, Laura, you'll walk away with everything you deserve, and more." I nodded, not for him, but for myself. For the nights I'd spent crying into empty sheets, for the weekends stolen from me, for the woman I'd been who once thought silence was strength. That woman was gone. Walking out of that office, I felt taller, lighter, like I'd finally stepped into my own life again. I wasn't just ending a marriage. I was reclaiming every piece of myself he'd tried to bury under lies. And as the door clicked shut behind me, I knew the next chapter wasn't about Daniel at all. It was about me, my freedom, and the weekends I was finally ready to live for myself. Months later, my weekends looked nothing like they used to. Instead of waiting for a door to open or a phone to ring, I spend Saturdays hiking trails I'd always dreamed of exploring. The crisp air on my face, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots, every step feels like proof that I'm alive, moving forward. On Sundays, I linger in cafes with my camera, capturing small moments of beauty I used to overlook. The rhythm of my life no longer revolves around Daniel's excuses. It beats to my own pulse. There's a quiet joy in reclaiming time that once belonged to someone else's lies. I joined a photography class, met women who had stories of their own, and found comfort in the way we laughed, shared, and lifted one another up. For years, I'd put my passions on a shelf, telling myself marriage came first. Now I realize I was allowed to come first all along. Freedom tastes a lot like hot coffee on a slow morning, like laughter echoing down a trail, like finally exhaling after holding my breath too long. And yet, I won't pretend the scars aren't there. They are. But instead of seeing them as ugly reminders, I've learned to see them as proof of survival, proof that I didn't break when life bent me to the edge. Every weekend is now a blank canvas, one I get to paint in my own colors, with no one to dim the palette. And that, I think, is the sweetest revenge of all. One Saturday afternoon, as I wandered through the aisles of a local grocery store, fate decided to test me. I spotted him, Daniel, standing there with a basket in his hand, looking smaller somehow, older. His hair was thinner, his posture slouched, like the weight of his choices had finally settled on him. For a second, my breath caught. The man who once consumed my thoughts, my tears, my nights of doubt, he was just another tired shopper, fumbling for change at the register. He noticed me before I could turn away. His eyes widened, and I saw the flicker of recognition, followed by regret. "Laura," he said softly, stepping closer. "I made a mistake. Can we at least talk?" His voice carried the desperation of a man who had lost more than he ever thought possible. For a heartbeat, The old ache tugged at me, but only for a heartbeat. I smiled, steady and sure, a woman no longer shaken by his presence. "No, Daniel," I replied, my tone calm, almost kind. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And now I'm finally free to live mine." I turned, my basket swinging at my side, and walked away, leaving him standing in that aisle with nothing but the echo of the life he threw away. As I stepped out of the store, sunlight washed over me, warm and unshakable, and I realized just how far I'd come. For years, my weekends had been stolen, spent waiting, doubting, shrinking into the shadows of Daniel's lies. But now, they were mine again. Each Saturday was an adventure, each Sunday a celebration of the woman I'd rediscovered. No more pretending, no more excuses, no more waiting for someone else to choose me. I was choosing myself. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, camera by my side, and watched the sky turn from gold to indigo. I thought about all the moments I used to dread, the silence, the absence, the loneliness, and how those very moments had pushed me to find my strength. What I once saw as the end of my world had become the beginning of a better one. Freedom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, quiet, and breathtakingly real. And so my weekends are no longer measured by who comes home and who doesn't. They're measured by laughter, discovery, and peace. I didn't just survive Daniel's betrayal. I turned it into the fuel that rebuilt my life. And the best part? I know now that the truest kind of love is the one I've finally given myself.